The air hit me, wrong the second I stepped through the gate. Not bad, not toxic, just wrong. Like breathing through a damp towel someone had left folded in a drawer for a week. The atmospheric processors in Wing 9 were calibrated for 17 different species. I was the 18th, and nobody had gotten around to updating the settings. I counted the ceiling vents while I waited in the intake line. 43. 4 of them were leaking a slow violet mist that smelled like copper and something I could not name but associated, for reasons I chose not to examine, with the back room of my grandmother's house in November. I filed that association away and stepped forward when the line moved. My name is Kara Ellison. I am from Chicago, Illinois Earth Sol System, which the Galactic Accord Military Academy intake forms listed under the column labeled Deathworld Origin Class 4. The cadet ahead of me was listed as Class 1. The one behind me was Class 2. I did not know what made a planet a Class 4 until the instructor at the front desk looked at my form, then looked at me, then looked back at the form like he was checking whether I was real. He was a Darvath. 3 eyes, pale gray skin, the kind of posture that suggested his species had evolved on a planet with twice Earth's gravity. He was broad and solid, and he looked at me like I was a stray animal that had somehow wandered into a place where stray animals were not supposed to survive. "Ellison," he said. "That's me." He handed me my key card and room assignment without another word. Wing 9 was on the eastern side of the Academy's main hub, accessible through 2 connecting corridors and 1 transit lift that smelled strongly of ammonia and something sweet underneath it, like overripe fruit. My room was on the 3rd level. I took the stairs because the lift was occupied by a cadet whose species I did not recognize, who was 3 times my height and apparently humming at a frequency I felt more in my back teeth than my ears. I counted the stairs, 61. My room was small and gray, and the gravity was set at 0.87 Earth standard, which meant I felt faintly springy every time I took a step, like the floor was thinking about giving way but had not fully committed. I dropped my pack on the bunk, sat down, and looked at the wall across from me. There was a sealed door in it. Not a closet, not a secondary storage hatch. A full-sized corridor door, the kind designed for regular foot traffic, sealed with a panel that had been bolted over from the outside. The bolts were new, newer than the door, newer than the wall around it. I counted them, 17. I was still counting them when someone knocked. She was waiting in the hall when I opened the door, and the first thing I noticed was that she was glowing, not brightly, not dramatically. A low, steady blue-green light that pulsed very slowly along the joints of her 6 arms like a heartbeat you could see. She was Kethsari. I had read about them in the pre-enrollment briefing packet. Tactile communicators, bioluminescent, bilateral symmetry from the waist up, radial from the waist down. Her face had 2 large dark eyes, no visible nose, and a mouth that was currently arranged in an expression I had not yet learned to read. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she tilted her head and pulsed once, soft and gold from her collarbone. I said, "I'm Cora." She touched 2 fingers to the inside of her own wrist and then held them out toward me, not reaching, offering. The briefing packet had covered this. It was a Kethsari introduction. The gesture meant something like, "I am placing myself in range of your awareness and I am choosing to do so." I touched 2 fingers to my own wrist and held them out. She pulsed gold again, steadier this time, and I understood enough to read that as something close to relief. Her name, as best as it translated, was Vreth. She had the room next to mine. She had arrived 6 hours before I did and had already mapped every corridor in Wing 9, cataloged the atmospheric irregularities by level, and identified which of the communal food dispensers was cross-contaminated with solvath protein compounds, which were technically edible for Kethsari but tasted. She indicated through a very precise dimming of her shoulder lights, like despair. I liked her immediately. She came inside and sat on the floor because Kethsari did not use chairs, and I sat on the bunk, and we spent an hour communicating in a combination of halting shared tongue and a gesture system we were inventing as we went. She was curious about everything. The calluses on my hands, the way I breathed, the small scar above my left eyebrow that I got when I was 9, and a piece of rebar introduced itself to my face during a training accident my mother still insisted on calling character building. Vreth traced the edge of the scar very lightly with one fingertip and pulsed a warm amber. Curious. Not sorry, curious. "You're not afraid of me," I said. She tilted her head. I tried again with gestures. I pointed to myself and made the hand motion we had developed for the concept of danger. She looked at my hands. Then she made a gesture I did not know yet, something fluid and deliberate, and then she pointed at herself. I figured it out later. What she meant was, I decided that already, before I knocked. The rest of the day was orientation. 47 cadets, 9 species, one instructor whose name I never caught because he spent the entire session referring to himself only as the coordinator, who had the energy of someone who had been doing this job for 40 years and had stopped being surprised by anything approximately 39 years ago. He walked us through the Wing 9 protocols, training rotations, meal cycles, emergency procedures. He covered the atmospheric systems, the gravity calibration schedule, the medical bay access rules. He did not mention the sealed corridor. I waited until the session ended and caught him before he left. "The door in my room," I said. "The sealed one. What's on the other side?" He looked at me with the particular expression of someone who had been asked a question they had answered many times and had decided, at some point, to stop answering fully. "Administrative," he said. He walked away. I went back to my room. Vreth was in the hallway outside hers. She had been watching the coordinator leave, and when I came through the main door, she turned to look at me and her lights, all of them, from shoulder to wrist to the faint glow along her lower limbs, went flat and dark and still. Not off, just still. The way a room goes quiet when someone says the wrong name. I looked at the sealed door at the end of the hall. I looked back at her. She did not move, did not pulse, did not offer the gold warmth of a moment ago. I counted the bolts on the sealed corridor door from 20 meters away. 17, same as mine. I went inside and ate my ration pack standing at the window, watching the academy's exterior lights come on one by one as the artificial evening cycle began. The pack had 22 ingredients according to the label. I read them all. Read them again. Outside, the light settled into something that was almost like dusk if you did not look too closely. I did not sleep well. The air was still wrong. Training started at 500, and the first thing the coordinator told us was that the academy did not make accommodations for biological variants. He said it like a compliment. He meant it like a warning. Wing 9's training rotation was divided into 4 categories: gravity endurance, atmospheric pressure tolerance, toxin exposure response, and interspecies combat drills. The coordinator ran us through the schedule with the cheerful efficiency of someone reading a lunch menu, and the cadets around me reacted with varying degrees of visible concern. The Solvith cadets, 2 of them, both tall and angular with gray-blue skin, and the kind of perfectly controlled posture that suggested they had been trained since birth to take up exactly as much space as was assigned to them, exchanged a look I could not fully read but which felt something like calculated. I picked up my training kit and followed the group. The gravity simulation chamber was on the 2nd level, calibrated that day to 1.4 times standard. For most of the cadets in the room, that was a meaningful increase. Their movement slowed. Their breathing changed. The Darvith cadet, a broad and quiet individual named Oren who had not yet spoken directly to me but had spent considerable time watching me from peripheral distances, handled it with the ease of someone built for exactly this. I handled it with the ease of someone who grew up on a planet where 1.4 times standard was a Tuesday. The coordinator watched me from the observation platform. He did not say anything. He wrote something on his tablet. The atmospheric pressure drill was worse for the others and fine for me. The toxin exposure rotation, low level, controlled. the kind of thing designed to test response thresholds rather than cause real harm, barely registered. My baseline tolerance numbers came back, per the testing console, in a range the system flagged with a yellow border because it had not been calibrated to expect them. After the third drill, one of the Solvith cadets filed something on their own tablet. I watched them do it. They did not look up. That evening in the common room, I sat with Vreth and a cadet named Oren, and a smaller, quieter individual whose name in shared tongue translated roughly to something like still water, though she told me I could call her Still, and she would understand. She was Marath, a species I had not encountered in the briefing packet, which meant she was either rare or recently admitted to Accord space, and her coloring shifted in very slow cycles through green and gray depending on her emotional state, which made her either the most transparent person I had ever met or a very committed liar. She was currently a steady, calm gray. Vreth sat close to me, close enough that her shoulder lights were visible when I turned. She was watching the room with the specific quality of attention I had started to recognize in her, not nervous, not suspicious, just very, very awake. Like someone monitoring a situation that had not yet become a problem but understood that it was thinking about it. The Solvith filed a variance complaint, Still said. Her shared tongue was precise and careful, like someone who had learned it from a dictionary. About the grading curve. I looked up, about me. About the mortality benchmarks. She shifted gray-green for a moment, then settled back. The drills are calibrated to species standard risk thresholds. Your baseline performance places the current calibration below your risk threshold. Technically, the drills do not qualify as drills for you. They qualify as routine activity. Oren made a sound that I had come to understand was the Darvith equivalent of a dry laugh. The complaint says the human's presence distorts the statistical model. Does it? Yes. I thought about that. Is that my problem? According to the Solvith filing, Still said, yes. I ate my ration pack. 18 ingredients this time, a different flavor. I counted them twice to be sure. 3 days later, Vreth was injured. It happened in the pressure chamber during the second rotation of the week. The chamber was calibrated for a combined drill, 2 cadets at once, side-by-side pressure tolerance test, designed for species with what the manual called redundant biological systems, meaning species that could afford to have something go wrong. The calibration file listed Vreth as Darvith. Darvith had redundant biology, Kethsari did not. I found out afterward, piecing it together from the incident report, and from what Oren told me in a low voice in the corridor outside the medical bay. The chamber hit a pressure spike at the 40-second mark of the drill. For Darvith, that spike was uncomfortable. For Kethsari, with their open circulatory system and non-redundant limb structure, it was something else entirely. Vreth lost 2 of her 6 arms. Not fully, not irreversibly, the medical staff said, but they said it the way people say things when they want the second word to carry more weight than the first. I stood in the corridor outside the medical bay for a long time. I counted the bolts on the door panel across from me. 32. Inside, I could see through the observation window that Vreth's lights were on, not the warm gold of ease or the blue-green pulse of her resting state. Flat, white, every light on her body burning the same steady, airless white, like something turned to a setting it was never designed to run at continuously. I had not learned that color yet. I did not need to. I went to find the coordinator. He was in his office on the 4th level, and he was not surprised to see me, which told me something. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I did not sit. The calibration file, I said. Is under review, he said. It listed her as Darvith. Clerical errors are. She almost died. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not categorize. Not guilty, not defensive. Something older than both of those. Something that had been sitting in a drawer for a long time and had mostly stopped moving. Cadet Ellison, he said, the review process will determine. who filed the calibration adjustment. He stopped. Before the drill, I said. The adjustment that updated the pressure spike threshold, who filed it. That information is part of an ongoing review. Yes, I turned toward the door. Thank you for your time. I walked back down to the medical bay, sat in the corridor outside it, put my back against the wall and looked at the door panel across from me. 32 bolts. I counted them until my breathing was even. Vreth's lights were still white when I finally looked back through the observation window, still burning that same flat, airless color, but she was looking at the window now. Looking at me. She raised one of her remaining arms slowly, carefully, and touched 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist. I pressed 2 fingers to mine. She pulsed once, faint and gold through all that white. Like a candle someone had lit in an empty building. I stayed until the medical staff turned off the corridor lights for the night cycle. The lockdown notice came at 300. No alarm, no announcement over the comm system, just a soft click from every door in Wing 9 and a red light that appeared on each lock panel, steady and uninflected. The way institutional things always are when they want you to understand that nothing personal is happening to you. I was already awake. I had been awake since 1:30 because the atmospheric processor on my level had been cycling through something that smelled like ammonia and burnt plastic. And my body, shaped by 22 years of breathing Chicago air, had decided that this qualified as a threat worth monitoring. I put my boots on and walked to the corridor. 3 other cadets were already in the hallway. Oren stood near the main door with his arms folded, reading the lock panel with the expression of someone who had been through procedures like this before and had complicated feelings about them. Still was further down the hall, her coloring cycling slowly between gray and a pale, anxious green. A 3rd cadet I knew only by sight, a Marath of a different caste from Still, broader and quieter, stood near the stairwell door and said nothing at all. Biocontamination protocol, Oren said when he saw me. Official designation. For what? The incident in the pressure chamber. I looked at him. He looked back at me with the specific steadiness of someone choosing what to say. Vreth is Kethsari, I said. Their biology is not a contamination risk. No, he said, it is not. He did not say anything else. I went to the food dispenser at the end of the hall and got a ration pack, 41 ingredients. I read the label twice, all the way through, standing in the low red light of the locked corridor, and by the time I finished, I felt something close to level. The common room filled slowly over the next 2 hours as the rest of the 9 cadets in Wing 9 woke up and found their doors sealed and made their way, one by one, to the only shared space still accessible. The Solvith cadets arrived last. They sat together at the far table, tablets out, and did not speak to anyone else. I watched them for a while. Then I stopped watching them, because watching the Solvith was like watching a closed cabinet and expecting it to tell you what was inside. I went back to my room and made a cup of the powdered coffee substitute from my personal kit. It tasted like dark roast, had a disagreement with sawdust, and they decided to compromise. I drank the whole thing standing at my window, watching the academy's exterior begin its slow shift from night lighting to the pale artificial morning. It used to keep multi-species circadian rhythms approximately aligned. I was comfortable. That was the thing I noticed, turning it over in my mind while the coffee cooled in my stomach. I was comfortable, locked in a sealed wing with 9 cadets of 5 species after a calibration incident that had nearly killed my only friend in the building, and I was comfortable. I had slept in worse places. I had been confined in smaller spaces. I had eaten food that made the ration packs look like fine dining. I looked around my room at the gray walls and the faintly springy floor and the 17 bolts on the sealed door and thought, I have been trained, without anyone meaning to train me, specifically for this. Earth does that to you. I visited Vreth in the medical bay at 900. She was in a room off the main bay, a small space calibrated for Kethsari atmospheric needs, which made it slightly too warm and slightly too humid for me, but manageable. She was sitting upright on the treatment platform, her two injured arms bound close to her body in a way that looked careful and deliberate, like something had been preserved rather than repaired. Her lights were still white. But when I came in, she turned to look at me, and something in the white shifted, not warmer, not softer, but directed. The way a searchlight is still white, but it is pointing at something. I sat on the low stool beside the platform and did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "The calibration file listed you as Darvith." She pulsed once, flat and white. "That was not an accident," I said. Another pulse, the same color. "You knew," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she raised one of her healthy arms and made a gesture I had not seen from her before, slow, precise, folding 3 fingers down and holding 2 up. In the gesture language we had built together over the past weeks, it did not have a meaning yet, but the context of it, the weight of it, told me what it was. "Not now, later." I nodded. She reached out and touched 2 fingers to my wrist and held them there and pulsed, very low, something that was not quite gold and not quite white, something in between, something I did not have a word for. I stayed for an hour. We did not talk about the corridor. We did not talk about the drill. She showed me, with careful and slow gestures, a memory she had from her home planet, a coastline, I thought, from the way her hands moved, and something about the light in the morning, and the way the water moved differently on her world than on mine. I told her about Chicago in January. She dimmed her shoulder lights at the right moment when I described the wind off the lake. I left her at 1100 and walked back into Wing 9. And that was when she told me about the corridor. Not in the medical bay. She had not wanted to say it there. She came to find me that evening, when the common room had emptied and Oren had gone to his room, and the Solvith cadets had retreated behind their closed door, and she found me in the corridor outside my room, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall and a ration pack in my hand, counting the seal bolts on the door I was not supposed to think about. She sat beside me, put her back against the wall the same way I had mine. It must have been strange for her with her radial lower body. She adjusted until she was balanced, and then she was simply there, her lights low and steady, and that complicated not gold, not white color that I still did not have a name for. She made the gesture for past, then she pointed to the sealed corridor. Then she made the gesture for human. I looked at the door. "There was someone here before me," I said. She pulsed once. "What happened to them?" She held up the 2-finger gesture again. "Not now, later." She put her hand on my wrist and held it there, and her lights did not change and neither did mine, though I was aware of something happening in the center of my chest that I did not intend to name in the middle of a sealed corridor at 2100 hours on a Wednesday. I looked at the bolts. 17. I had counted them so many times that the number had stopped being a number and had become something else. A word. A name for the specific feeling of knowing something is wrong and not yet knowing how wrong. Past tense, I thought. There was another one. Past tense. I ate my ration pack. It had 22 ingredients. I counted them twice. I want to be clear about what I am. I am not a soldier. I am not an investigator. I am not trained in intelligence work or tactical analysis or any of the disciplines that might make what I did next sound calculated. I am from Chicago. On Earth, in Chicago, you learn certain things not because anyone teaches them to you, but because the environment teaches them to you over and over, in small and large ways, until they become reflex. You learn to read a room when you walk into it. You learn to track which people in a group are performing ease rather than feeling it. You learn that when something goes wrong and the official explanation is too smooth, too quick, too clean, you go back and look at the thing itself before you look at what anyone said about it. You learn patience. Not the gentle kind, the other kind. The kind that comes from waiting in cold places for things that take a long time and do not care whether you are comfortable. The lockdown gave me time. Wing 9 gave me a small, controlled environment with a defined list of people in it, and the coordinator's face, on the day I asked him who filed the calibration adjustment, gave me the one thing I needed to start: a direction. I spent the first full day of the lockdown being normal, ate my ration packs in the common room, ran through my personal training rotation in the corridor because the training hall was sealed during the lockdown, and I did not deal well with stillness. Let the other cadets watch me do pull-ups on the door frame and did not explain myself, because explaining yourself when other people are watching you is a habit I had outgrown by age 12. The Solvith cadets watched me from behind their tablets. They were always watching from behind their tablets. I ate a ration pack, read the label. 22 ingredients. On the second day, I started mapping. Not physically. In my head, the way I had been taught to map a space without looking like I was mapping it, tracking exits, access points, areas that were locked versus areas that were locked only because no one had thought to unlock them. Wing 9 had 3 atmospheric processing units, 2 of which were on the upper levels and 1 of which was on the ground level, in a maintenance corridor that connected to the sealed passage. The maintenance corridor was technically part of the lockdown zone. It was also the only part of Wing 9 that had been calibrated, approximately, for an atmosphere that was closer to Earth standard than anything else in the building, because whoever had done the original setup had started with Earth as a baseline and then adjusted upward for everyone else. That meant it was too warm for the Solvith, too low pressure for the Darvith, too dry for Vreth, and completely, straightforwardly comfortable for me. I went in on the third night of the lockdown at 200, while the rest of Wing 9 was in their sleep cycles. The maintenance corridor was dark and narrow and smelled like circulated air and machine oil, and I moved through it using my tablet screen on its lowest setting, just enough light to read the door numbers on the panels I passed. The second intersection brought me to the wall I had been expecting, the back side of the sealed corridor. The lock panel here was different from the one on my side. On my side, it had been bolted over with new hardware. Back here, on the maintenance side, the panel was old, original installation, the kind of hardware they had stopped using in this section of the Academy 2 facility upgrades ago, according to the orientation materials I had memorized, because memorizing things people hand you in official packets is one of the most reliable ways to find out what they forgot to hide. I took the seal off a ration pack wrapper, folded it lengthwise 3 times until it was narrow and stiff, used the edge of it to press the manual bypass lever, which existed on every lock panel manufactured before the third Accord infrastructure standardization, and which most people either forgot about or assumed was purely cosmetic. It was not cosmetic. The panel clicked. I counted the seconds it took for the door to disengage. 17. I went in. The corridor was not long. 4 rooms, 2 on each side, and a common area at the end. The gravity was set lower than Wing 9 standard, closer to 0.8 Earth standard, which would have felt light for most species, but was the low end of normal for a human body that had been shaped by a heavier world. The atmospheric settings were, I noticed, very close to correct for an Earth standard human. Someone had calibrated this for a person like me. The first 3 rooms were empty and sealed. The fourth was not sealed, and when I pushed the door open, I stood in the frame for a moment and let my tablet light sweep slowly across the room before I stepped in. It had been preserved. Not cleaned out, not emptied. Everything left exactly where it was, which meant that either it had been locked up in a hurry or someone had wanted it to stay. There was a pack in the corner, standard Accord issue, with personal patches on the shoulder straps, Earth patches, the kind they give you at the off-world orientation before you ship out. With the planet sigil and the departure year, the patches read 2 cycles ago. There was a training jacket hung over the back of a chair, name printed on the inside collar in the permanent marker that cadets used when the embroidery kits ran out. Airstyle, it said. Cadet Airstyle. I stood there for a moment with the sound of the maintenance corridor behind me, and the faint hum of the atmospheric processors, and the specific particular silence of a room that had been waiting. I found the log on the small shelf above the bunk. A personal record tablet, the kind with a physical journal interface, the kind people used when they did not trust the Academy's digital logging system to stay private. I picked it up, did not open it there, put it in my inside jacket pocket and left the room and sealed the door behind me and walked back through the maintenance corridor and into Wing 9 and to my own room, and I sat on my bunk in the dark. I did not open the log. Not yet. I lay back on the bunk and looked at the ceiling and counted the panels. 41. In the morning, I went to the common room at the start of the day cycle and got a ration pack and sat at the table nearest the door. The Sci-Fi cadets came in 12 minutes later, 12 minutes after the common room unlocked, which told me they had been waiting, which told me, in the specific grammar of people who are performing normalcy, that they had a reason to be monitoring when the common room opened. I watched them set their tablets on the table. I watched them sit. I watched the one on the left, taller, with the Sci-Fi secondary eye ridge that indicated a supervisory caste, open their tablet and begin typing with the deliberate, practiced efficiency of someone who had been trained to look occupied. I ate my ration pack. Then I put it down. The calibration adjustment, I said, for the pressure chamber on the day of the drill. Neither of them looked up immediately. The delay was very small, less than a second, but I had been raised on a world where the speed of a reaction told you more than the reaction itself. I don't know what you're referring to, the taller one said. Yes, you do. Cadet Ellison, if you have a concern about the incident review. I don't have a concern about the review, I said. I have a question about timing. Now he looked at me. The Sci-Fi secondary eye ridge was a single horizontal line of pale cartilage above the brow. His had gone very flat and still, which in Sci-Fi body language, according to the pre-enrollment packet that I had memorized, indicated the cessation of active deception assessment. Meaning, he had decided I could not prove anything. Did you file the adjustment before or after Vreth entered the chamber? I said. He said nothing. I did not need him to. The silence had a shape. It was the shape of someone who had done something in a specific order and was now deciding whether the order mattered. I stood up, put my ration pack wrapper in the disposal, walked back to my room. Sat down on my bunk. Put my hands flat on my knees. The thing I had not said out loud, the thing I had been working toward since the maintenance corridor, settled into place with the quiet, inevitable logic of something that had always been true and had simply been waiting for me to turn around and face it. They had not been aiming at Vreth. The pressure chamber drill, the calibration file, the adjustment filed before the drill, listing a Kethsari cadet as Darvith, setting the pressure spike to a level that would be extreme for most species and routine for one. One species. Earth Standard, Class 4. They had been aiming at the human cadet. Vreth had entered the chamber as my paired partner for the drill. She had been in the wrong place, in the wrong body, at the moment when something designed to end the human cadet's academy career had activated. And I was alive because of the Kethsari who was now in the medical bay, with 2 arms bound against her body, and every light burning white. I did not say anything. I did not get up. I put my back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and counted the panels until my breathing was the same as it always was. 41. I took Erstow's log out of my pocket. I opened it. I read. I read until the day cycle ended and the common room lights dimmed and Wing 9 went quiet around me. I read until I knew everything I was going to know and there was nothing left in the log to read. Then I closed it, put it back in my pocket. Counted the ceiling panels one more time. 41. I put my boots on. There are things they do not tell you at the Galactic Accord Military Academy orientation. They do not tell you that the atmospheric systems in Wing 9 have been recalibrated 11 times in the past 4 years. each time following an incident involving a new cadet type that the original designers did not account for. They do not tell you that the species diversity tracking system still runs on an infrastructure model that assumes all accepted cadets fall within a biological variance window established in the Academy's founding charter, a window that was drawn up by 6 species who had, at the time, never met a Deathworld Class 4 organism and had not left room for the possibility. They do not tell you that there was a cadet named Erstau. They do not tell you that he was from Devon, England, Earth, Sol system, Deathworld Class 4, and that he arrived in Wing 9 2 cycles before I did, full of the same compact, adaptive stubbornness that Earth builds into people whether they ask for it or not. That he outperformed every calibration in his first week, same as I had. That his presence distorted the statistical models for mortality benchmarks the same way mine did. That the Solveth filed a variance complaint in his second week, same as they had in mine. They do not tell you that the complaint escalated. That the escalation led to a series of calibration adjustments in the training systems of Wing 9, adjustments filed by cadets of a supervisory caste who had access to the system, and a strong institutional incentive to restore the mortality curve to its expected shape. They do not tell you that one of those adjustments in Erstau's 8th week sent him to the medical bay. That he left the medical bay. That he sat in his room in the sealed corridor with the door locked, and he did not come back to training, and he did not file a complaint, and he did not do any of the things you would expect a person to do when a system had tried to quietly remove him from it. He just wrote in his log. Every day for 3 weeks he wrote in his log, and then one day he stopped, and the entry before the last one said, "I am going home." Not because I am beaten, because I am choosing to leave on my own terms before they take the choice away from me. There is a difference, and I will not pretend there is not. The last entry said, "I hope whoever comes after me is harder than I am." I read that line 7 times. Then I closed the log and put my boots on. The lockdown lifted at 400. I know this because I was the only one awake when it happened. The red light on the lock panel in the corridor went out very quietly. No announcement, no tone, just a faint mechanical click that I heard because my room was closest to the main door, and I had been lying on my bunk in the dark, boots on, pack ready, since 300. I got up, opened my door, walked to the main corridor. Wing 9 was empty and quiet in the way that sealed spaces are quiet, not peaceful, just absent, the way a held breath is different from a resting one. The lights were on their lowest night setting, a pale blue-gray that made the walls look underwater. I stood in the corridor for a moment and let my eyes adjust. Then I heard the door to the medical bay wing open. Vreth came out slowly. She was moving more carefully than usual, her 6 arms held in a configuration I had not seen before, the 2 injured ones still bound but held differently now, lower and angled, suggesting something between discomfort and deliberate compensation. Her lights were still white, not the flat emergency white of the first night, something slightly warmer now. Still white, but the kind of white that has a small amount of something else in it. The way early morning sky is still dark, but is not the same dark as midnight. She saw me standing in the corridor. We looked at each other. I held up 2 fingers and pressed them to the inside of my wrist. She held up 2 fingers and pressed them to hers. Then she walked to me slowly and sat on the floor against the wall, the way she had done that first evening outside our rooms when we had spent an hour building a shared language out of nothing. I sat beside her. Our shoulders were almost touching. Her lights pulsed once, low and amber. For a while, we did not say anything. The academy outside was beginning its slow, artificial dawn. Through the narrow window at the end of the corridor, I could see the exterior lights shifting from night blue to the pale gray that preceded the morning setting. Another 20 minutes and the full day cycle would start, and the academy would wake up, and Wing 9 would fill again with sounds and the smell of atmospheric processors, and the specific energy of 9 cadets trying to navigate a space not designed for any of them. But right now it was 4:10, and the corridor was empty, and the lights were still blue. I took Erstal's log out of my pocket. I held it for a moment, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. It was light, the way important things sometimes are. Vreth looked at it. Her lights shifted, barely, towards something that was not quite gold and not quite white. The color she showed sometimes that I still did not have a word for. I had been thinking about it since the first night she sat beside me in this corridor, and I had decided quietly, without telling anyone, that the right word for it was probably mine. That it was a color she had developed specifically for a context she had not previously encountered, which was this one, which was me. I opened the log to the last entry. "I am going to read you something," I said. She tilted her head and went still and listened. I read him the last line, just the one. "I hope whoever comes after me is harder than I am." My voice was even. I had been practicing being even in situations that did not call for evenness, since I was old enough to understand that evenness was a skill and not a natural state. Vreth sat with it for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand on my wrist, the healthy one, and pressed 2 fingers against the inside of it and held them there. She pulsed the unnamed color, steady and slow. I closed the log, put it back in my pocket, sat with the weight of it against my ribs. I thought about Erstal in his room 2 cycles ago, writing every day, choosing his exit, walking out through the main door of the academy with his pack on his shoulder, and the specific dignity of someone who had decided that the terms of their departure were the one thing a broken system could not take from them. I thought about the 17 bolts on the sealed corridor. I thought about the coordinator saying administrative and walking away. I thought about the Deathworld Cadet going very, very still when I asked him about timing. I thought about what they had been expecting me to do. They had expected, I understood now, one of 2 things. They had expected me to fail visibly, to be broken by the drills, to be overwhelmed by the environment, to provide them with a clean and documentable reason to reclassify my enrollment. When that did not work, when the drills that were supposed to push me had simply been routine activity for a body built on a Class 4 world, they had escalated, had tried to manufacture the failure through the calibration system. And when that had put Vreth in the medical bay instead of me, they had sealed Wing 9 and called it administrative and waited, because waiting was what you did when a problem was still alive and you needed it to lose patience. They did not understand that I did not lose patience. On Earth, patience was not a virtue. It was infrastructure. It was the thing you built your survival on when everything else was uncertain, because waiting out a problem was sometimes the only option available, and if you were going to wait anyway, you might as well be comfortable. I was comfortable. I was so completely, natively comfortable that I had spent 3 days of lockdown being the calmest person in Wing 9, and that had told me more than any conversation. The exterior lights shifted. The pale gray deepened very slightly towards something that was closer to white. The first hint of the Academy's artificial morning beginning to assert itself against the night setting. I looked at Vreth. "The Deathworld Cadet," I said. "Do you know if they're still in Wing 9? She made a gesture, a short, deliberate one. I recognized the motion that meant moved, transferred, gone. "When?" She held up 3 fingers and then made the gesture for before now. 3 days ago, during the lockdown. A transfer processed quietly, officially, for reasons that would be listed on the administrative record as academic performance." I thought about that. "The coordinator arranged it," I said. She pulsed once, flat and white, the same way she had pulsed when I first asked about the corridor, but underneath the white, barely visible, a thin thread of amber. "Meaning, yes, and also, it is not quite that simple." "He arranged the transfer," I said slowly, "but not the original filing." She pulsed twice, fast gold. "Meaning, yes, exactly yes." I sat with that for a moment. The coordinator had not set up the calibration. He had not filed the adjustment. He had not targeted me or Erstal before me. What he had done, what he was doing was managing, containment, taking a situation that had gotten complicated and smoothing it back down to a surface that looked clean from above. The Solvith transfer was not justice, it was the institution protecting itself. Which meant the coordinator knew what had happened, and had decided the most efficient outcome was to remove the cause and leave the record untouched. I looked at the floor. I had two choices, and I knew what they were. I could file a report, a full one with the log, with the maintenance corridor access records, with the timing evidence from the calibration filing. I could put it in front of an oversight body and let the process run. I could make it official and clean and documented, and give the Academy's administrative system the opportunity to look at what had happened in Wing 9 and decide what it was. I knew what the administrative system would decide. It would decide that the incident was an isolated error, that the transfer of the cadet responsible had resolved the immediate concern, that the log I had found in a sealed corridor through an unauthorized access route was not admissible evidence under the Academy's internal review protocols. It would be filed under variance incident, ongoing review, and the sealed corridor would stay sealed, and the bolts would stay 17, and the next human cadet to arrive in Wing 9 would find the same door, the same panel, the same institutional silence. Or I could stay. I could put my boots on every morning and walk to the training floor, and be the most straightforwardly difficult problem the Academy's calibration system had ever encountered, because I was a Class 4 organism, and the calibration system was not built for Class 4 organisms, and I had no intention of making that easier on anyone. I could be present in a way that was impossible to file away. I could be the thing that made the closed cabinet rattle. And I could do it, not loudly, not dramatically, not in any way that gave the institution a clean target for another administrative action. I could do it the way Earth had taught me to do everything that mattered, with patience, with steadiness, with the specific stubbornness of a body built on a world that tried to end you on a Tuesday and called it weather. Erstal had chosen to leave on his own terms. I understood that choice. I respected it with everything I had. It was not my choice. I looked at Vreth. She was watching me. Her lights were still that complicated not gold, not white, and her two fingers were still on my wrist, not pressing, just resting, the way she did when she was not trying to communicate anything specific, but simply wanted there to be contact. I am not leaving, I said. Her lights shifted, warm gold, slow and steady, like something coming back to a temperature it had always been meant to hold. She pulsed once. I took a breath. Then I got up, put my pack on, walked to the door of the common room, hit the panel and walked through into the training corridor, which was no longer locked, which was empty and gray and lit by the Academy's early morning settings, pale and functional and calibrated for 17 different species, and not for mine. The floor was cold through my boots. It was 4:20, 40 minutes before the first rotation. I was first on the training floor. I set my pack down against the wall. I looked at the room. The gravity was wrong. The atmosphere was slightly wrong. The ceiling was too high and the floor panels were too large, and the whole space had been designed around a set of assumptions that did not include me and had not thought to. I counted the floor tiles. It took a while. I had time. I started my warm-up. Behind me, in the corridor, I heard the soft sound of a door opening and careful footsteps, and then Vreth was in the frame of the training room door, her lights low and warm and steady, watching me with her large dark eyes, and her two good arms held loose at her sides. She did not come in. She stood in the doorway. I nodded at her once. She pulsed gold and stayed where she was. I kept moving. Orin arrived 6 minutes later, then two cadets I barely knew from the lower levels, who stopped in the doorway and looked at me and at Vreth and at each other and then came in and started their own rotations without a word. The training floor filled slowly. The Academy's morning lights came on at 500. I was already warm. Outside, through the high windows of the training corridor, the artificial dawn completed itself the way it did every morning, the exterior lights shifting through their full cycle until they settled into something that was almost like daylight if you had never seen the real thing, which nobody in this building except me had. I had. I knew the difference. It did not matter. I kept going anyway. The academy was not built for humans. Erstal knew that. I know that. I know the atmospheric pressure is wrong, and the caloric ratios are insufficient, and the mortality benchmarks were drawn on a map that left my entire species off the edge. I know the calibration system does not have a setting for what I am. I know the sealed corridor is still sealed, and the bolts are still 17, and somewhere in an administrative record, there is a variance incident notation that will sit there, unresolved, waiting to be either addressed or forgotten. I know all of that. I laced my boots anyway. I counted the floor tiles anyway. I showed up at 4:20 on the first morning Wing 9 was unlocked, and I was warm before the lights came on, and I will be warm before the lights come on tomorrow, and the day after and every day that comes after that, until either the system adjusts, or I make it adjust, or I find a third option that nobody has thought of yet. Because finding third options in systems that were not designed for you is something Earth teaches you without meaning to. The same way it teaches you patience and stubbornness, and the particular art of being completely, inconveniently, natively alive in places that assumed you would not be. Vreth stood in the doorway with her lights burning warm and slow and gold. I kept moving. The floor was cold. I had counted every tile. I had time for more.